Hey everybody, Pat Armstrong here with the latest from Increase, the lifestyle vlog for men and the women who love them. Now most of you know I identify as a conservative, and I would be very happy to see our country continue on its primarily conservative path. I truly think that would make this a better place for all its citizens. Now others are just as convinced that the ideas put forth by liberals or progressives, whichever term you prefer to use, but they think that's what the country needs. They would like to see the country adopt only liberal views. Now neither of those things are going to happen, no matter how much the true believers on both sides want it. There are not enough citizens on either the left or the right to impose their agenda on the country. That's because most Americans are either liberal or conservative in word only. And they truly are moderates. And while they believe some liberal things and some conservative things, they don't accept the whole agenda of either side of the political spectrum. And you know what? That's okay. Unfortunately, too many of our politicians don't want to admit this. They seem to have an all or nothing attitude. And for them, there is no middle ground. It's either victory or defeat for their personal ideology. Now, I thought they were supposed to represent the people. But that has resulted in an extremely partisan government where neither Republican nor Democrat give an inch. Now, it hasn't always been this way. In the past, the two sides have respected each other, and while they didn't agree, they were able to talk to each other and had a compromise to move the country forward. They didn't view each other as enemies, but just as opponents who had different ideas, and they hammered out solutions that allowed both sides to retain their values and beliefs. Neither side got everything they wanted, but both could claim at least partial victory. And that's the way things work in a democracy. Unfortunately, that's not how our democracy is currently working. And it's why our federal government seems incapable of solving any of the nation's problems. They no longer understand this simple concept: compromise is not a dirty word. Now, this is not a political rant. That's just an easy place to look and see what happens when people are not willing to come together and compromise. And compromise is not just for the politician. The idea of compromise can apply to every part of your life, from negotiating a sale at your job to remediating a disagreement in your marriage. Compromise must be reached for any type of peace. And today, I want to look at a king who lost most of his kingdom because he was not willing to compromise. Before we get into this, I do want to say that there are some absolutes and beliefs that cannot be compromised. But that is the exception rather than the rule. Most people are not willing to compromise based on one word, and it's spelled P-R-I-D-E. Now we pick up the story in the Bible in 1 Kings chapter 11. Solomon is still on the throne, but just like with any politician, he has made some enemies. One such person was a man by the name of Jeroboam. Now, Jeroboam's rebellion was not due to anything he had done, but what Solomon had done. Due to the fact that Solomon had turned his back on God, God was going to take his kingdom away from him. The only thing that saved Solomon's family from losing the whole kingdom was his father David. God promised David that one of his heirs would always be on the throne. Unfortunately, because of David's son Solomon, the kingdom was divided into 10 tribes called Israel and only 2 tribes called Judah. Solomon's son Rehoboam would be the king of Judah, while Solomon's servant Jeroboam would be the new king of Israel. Now, even though this division was appointed by God, after Solomon died, we see in 1 Kings chapter 12 that Jeroboam, as a representative of the entire country of Israel, went to King Rehoboam and asked for some relief. On behalf of the entire country, this is what Jeroboam asked of Rehoboam in 1 Kings chapter 12 and verse 4. Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore, lighten the burdensome service of your father, and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. Now, I believe this was a reasonable request. Even though Israel had enjoyed many years of prosperity under Solomon, everything comes at a price. Now the Israelites were respectfully asking of the new king for some relief from the financial burden Solomon had placed on them. I believe there are some good lessons, and I believe there's one not so good lesson that we can learn from Rehoboam and his response to Jeroboam and all of Israel at this time. So good lesson number one, Rehoboam asked for time to consider the situation. He didn't automatically dismiss everybody by saying something like, well, if it was good enough for Daddy, it's good enough for me. Or, well, that's the way we've always done it. Or, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, obviously, in the mind of the people, something was broken. And they didn't care if that's the way it had always been done. They wanted to at least see if something different would be considered. And Rehoboam gave them that. Good lesson number two. Rehoboam sought counsel. Rehoboam actually learned a valuable lesson from his father. In Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 14, the Bible says, where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Rehoboam did seek counsel. And the Bible tells us in 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 6 and 7, then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he still lived, and he said, how do you advise me to answer these people? And they spoke to him, saying, if you will be a servant to these people today, and serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. Now maybe it's due to my conservative nature, but wow, I think that's great advice. These men who served under Solomon all those years didn't say, well, you know, Rehoboam, you should do it Daddy's way. Or, you know, we ain't never done it that way before. They said, look, Rehoboam, if you will serve the people, they will serve you. Then Rehoboam sought more counsel. In 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given him, and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. And he said to them, what advice do you give? How should we answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, lighten the yoke which your father put on us? Then the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, thus you should speak to the people who have spoken to you, saying, your father made our yoke heavy, but make it lighter on us. Thus you shall say to them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges. So after getting the advice of the older men, Rehoboam went and talked to his buddies, the guys he grew up with, and asked their opinion. Now, there was nothing wrong with doing that. There was nothing wrong with consulting another generation and asking them how they would handle it. But unfortunately, this led to a bad decision. And the bad decision that Rehoboam made was he didn't truly consider both sides. The problem was that he totally rejected the words of the older generation and went totally with his buddies. The next thing that Rehoboam should have done was considered both sides and maybe even brought together representatives from both sides to work out a compromise. Something that would have been good for the people. It may not have been giving them everything that they asked for, but a compromise might have saved the kingdom from civil war and ultimate division. And of course, you can imagine the response of the people. Total rebellion. In 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 16 and 17, the Bible tells us, "Now when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, saying, 'What share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel! Now see to your own house, O David.' So Israel departed to their tents. But Rehoboam reigned over the children of Israel who dwelt in the cities of Judah." Now again, I know this split was foreordained by God because of Solomon's rebellion. But in normal circumstances, Rehoboam could have saved himself a lot of trouble and maybe even his kingdom if he would have compromised. Compromise is not a dirty word. Compromise is actually defined as an agreement or a settlement of a dispute that is reached by each side making concessions. Each side has to be willing to make concessions. That means both sides have to be willing to give something up for the benefit of all. And as long as people have the attitude that it's my way or the highway, we will never have compromise. And our relationships will always be in turmoil.